have a mix of partners that we'll bring to the table for construction financing. Depending on the scale, we'll also either self-fund or we will bring other partners on board. It ramps up. So on day one, shovel to dirt, you're out $100. But then as you quickly start to, go vertical, you start to spend $100 a second. And so
today on the podcast, we had Aaron Tudisco from Sonoma, and it was just a great interview. I think what I liked most about it is you can just hear it. If you don't get to see him, I'd highly recommend head to our webpage or our YouTube channel, but the joy just radiates out of Aaron. And really his family business, they had a multi-decade career, all of them, and then they decided to move to Sonoma, partner with his dad, his wife, and his sister, and start their company. And just really, really interesting story. You really get kind of the deep dive of how they've constructed their company. One of the things that was really interesting is that they only do spec homes, and they're really gravitating towards the experience of the homeowner when they come in, and they're not really marketing it until it's ready to show. So without further ado, here's Aaron with Ridge Design and Build. Welcome to Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today I'm joined we've got Aaron Tudisco. Tudisco? How do you pronounce your name, Aaron? Tudisco. All right. From Ridge Design and Build out in the Sonoma, California area. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is cool. So I can't remember if it was your wife or someone on your team that reached out and said you'd have an awesome story. And as I was looking into your bio, first of all, your homes are ridiculous. They are beautiful. It's been a while since I've been in Sonoma. My wife, when we were dating, was doing her residency out in San Francisco, and we drove through there for a little weekend. And it is a charming area. Now I want to come back so I can come see your homes in person. Anyway, it's you picked a beautiful part of the country to be a builder.
It is. It's a wonderful place to live. It's a wonderful place to do business, and we remind ourselves how lucky we are every time we get in the car and drive around. So, yeah, come and visit us, and we'd love to show you.
Yeah, well, I mean, gorgeous work. We'll have everything in the show notes, and your website is remarkable. You have a really unique story, and I'd love to hear your take on it. You guys started your company. I love in your bio. It's like your father, your sister, and your wife in 2018. Like, you weren't spring chickens. You obviously had a career beforehand, and we'll get into that. And obviously, I'd love to hear where you're at now. But let's go back to the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your career up into deciding to be a builder. And it sounds like you kind of grew up on job sites as well, like so many of us builders have done and do. And then I love this idea that you started the business with your dad, your sister, and your wife. That's got to be a story in that. So why don't you give us the background?
Yeah, so I grew up the son of a builder, and that meant that on weekends before the sun broke, I was woken up and put in the truck and taken to job sites. And as a young boy, it was a mix of fascination, excitement, and 100% pure dread. As a kid, my father, I think, really wanted to drive home. At the root of it, he wanted to instill a work ethic, which at the time it's a hard lesson for a young kid to understand. In hindsight now, I feel so fortunate that he cared enough to drive that into me. But yeah, as a young kid, I was on job sites in Tucson, Arizona. My father built homes for 40 plus years, hundreds of them. And I would work with framing crews, roofing crews, and got a sense of bits and pieces of how a home was built. But then in the midst of all that and being a teenager and wanting to find a career or identity of my own, I have a letter I wrote when I think it was the summer between my junior and senior year. And I wrote it. I'd been to Europe for the summer, and it was time for me to start to consider, when I get back and graduate from college, what am I going to do? What career am I going to maybe start to embark on? And it meant enough to me to put in this letter to send to my mom and dad, who I had a great relationship with, but it meant enough for me to put in writing, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I'm not going to build houses. And my mom and dad still have that letter. But I think what it was a reflection of really, wanting to see what else was out there. And my father was never one to force me to do anything. He welcomed the idea that I would go out and try to find something else to do. So I graduated from college and went into marketing at the Gap and Old Navy. And then wanting to flex a kind of creative muscle, I went to film school and moved from then Los Angeles back up to the Bay Area and worked at Lucasfilm for a number of years, first within ILM and their special effects production division, and then moving into story development at ILM, and then eventually Lucasfilm Animation. And then dabbled in that for a number of years in all of that, got married, moved back to LA, over to Ohio, went back into retail marketing, and over a period of almost 20 years, dabbled in a number of different careers. But the one common thread between all of the different positions I held was really this sense of kind of project management. And what I loved about either marketing, creative marketing, production marketing, and working in film was that I sat in between, someone who owned creative and somebody who owned production, the operation side of the business. And I found that my value was really in having a certain respect for what everyone was trying to achieve and helping problem solve and in an effort to kind of get that done. And so in a way, it kind of didn't matter really what I was doing as long as I was flexing those muscles. And so, it was like 2017, my wife and I, we had 2 kids at the time. We were living in Columbus, Ohio, which is a beautiful place, by the way. We had an amazing time there. But my father had kind of semi-retired into Sonoma. My sister, Allegra, who was living in the city, had moved her family up to Sonoma, and they built a home. And, from a distance, I kind of said, "Ooh, that looks interesting and fun." And my father didn't pull out the letter and say, "Well, you said you didn't never want to do this again." But that was the impetus to us talking about kind of all coming together and starting a business. And while I had this myriad of experiences in corporate roles, so did my sister Allegra, had a long career at Google from the very, very early days. My wife in retail merchandising as well. So we all had this really unique kind of different mix of backgrounds and complemented, I think, all of what we could bring to the table. But at the center of it all was clearly this idea of, "Hey, Dad, we're coming home and we want you to teach us." And so, which to my father was like a dream come true.
I bet he didn't see. Did he see that coming? I mean, 20 years is a long time between saying never and then all of a sudden now the whole family sort of united. I mean, that's a pretty special kickoff. Like, did it come up? Was it kind of slow, or once you how was the conversations with your sister? Like, hey, we should do this together. How did those first conversations? Because you had to move from Columbus back. How did those conversations? Like, we're just going to go all in. Did you kind of try it, come back for a couple months, or what was that? Or just we're cutting all ties and just going cold turkey straight into it?
Honestly, it was mostly the latter. I mean, as my father and Allegra were building a home in Sonoma, we would always come to Sonoma for holidays. So we were here for Thanksgivings and Christmases, New Year's, et cetera. And so as we would return, we'd always say, "Oh, we'd love to find a way to move out here one day." And as we saw Allegra and my dad build a home, and then they started to dabble in development themselves by acquiring some land, it just kind of, I think, it just set a spark in Sina and my minds. And my father and Allegra were just, so receptive and open to it. So I think my father did not push the idea at all, but he certainly was welcoming and helped kind of paint a picture of how this could all work together.
That's amazing. So now it's been 7 years.
We moved here in 2018. Yes. Yeah.
Wow. It's interesting. One thing that I could really relate to, my dad and mom were also builders and designers. And I knew that was the one thing I also did not want to do, because you don't want to do what your parents did. Well, I didn't wait 20 years. I think I waited 3. They were retired though. And my dad and I are super close. And so maybe it wouldn't have worked. It probably would have been just fine. But I think it was one of those things that I didn't hear these. I mean, as an entrepreneur, especially in a multi-generational one, there's this narrative that a business is handed to you. First of all, I systematically reject that statement in terms of the connotations that people and stereotypes take with it, because regardless of what the handoff between one generation to another is less of like, here you go. It's more like the 4x100 relay. You still have to run your leg alone. Like, sure, someone ran the first or second leg or whatever leg in this relay analogy you're using, but you still have to run that leg. And you have to do the work. I think there's a common conception for people that aren't in business and aren't in family businesses, that they look on a family business and they're saying, "Oh, that way was paved for them." And there's I've had a lot of family businesses on the podcast, and it's one of my favorite kind of topics to kind of get into, because if you are inheriting the mantle of another business, there's some weight there. And sometimes it's actually not the easiest. Sometimes it is easier to start over than to continue. And anyway, everyone has their own path. a business is hard. It's kind of like my wife always says, everyone's hard is their hard. It's a little bit like running. If you can run a 10-minute mile or a 6-minute mile, they might both be equally hard, just depending on your fitness level and talent level. It doesn't really matter. And so hard is hard. Anyway, so I love this story. So what were those early years like? You guys were doing spec homes, I assume?
Yeah. So, and to really feed off of what you were saying too, was that my father had really run his business in Arizona for the 40 years. And building in Arizona has its own unique challenges and opportunities that were very different than what we do now in Sonoma. And so I think when we started with my father, as you said, he did pass a baton to us, but it was definitely a very different business. There wasn't an infrastructure or a brand that we kind of picked up and carried forth. It was really an opportunity for him to kind of almost reinvent his experience in a new way and take it to a new landscape. And so those early days were basically about, well, what do we want to do, right? So do we want to build at a certain level, at a certain scale? Do we want to do custom projects? Do we want to do spec? The one thing my father, and I can remember this even as a kid, and my mother also was very involved in the business. Some might say that my mother was behind the curtain, but pulling all the levers and making sure that my father could run the business that in the way that he did. But, growing up with both of them so involved in the business, I remember very specifically, because my father did a mix of both spec and custom. And for every 2 custom projects he would do where he would protect his margin, knew what he would make at the end of the day, he would take that money and he would invest it into a spec project. And I remember during those moments where he was building for spec, he was happier. He was getting to execute a vision that he was passionate about. He got to make decisions that he felt were the right ones. And he didn't have to sit across the table and try to manage decision making from a married couple or whoever it may be. So I think my father certainly leaned on saying, look, I think you guys are going to be happier. It's the risk is far greater, but I think you guys are going to be happier pushing a spec business here in Sonoma.
It's a really interesting narrative and not an uncommon one. We could actually kind of debate the pros and cons. Like in your 7-year career, how many homes have you done on spec percentage wise versus custom?
So we are really, as a business, exclusively spec. We're just finishing our 8th project right now. We've done 1 custom project, and that the only exception was because it was for a very, very good friend of ours who, despite our efforts of saying no repeatedly, refused to accept it. And, that was mostly out of a concern of just, we have a relationship as friends, and I didn't want to tarnish what can also often be a very challenging journey. Building a home is not hard. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. There are a lot of obstacles and fallbacks along the way. And I didn't want to compromise my relationship with this individual, having a 25-year friendship preceding it. But he pushed and pushed, and I'm really glad that he did. We had an amazing journey through it. We both look back and I think are closer because of it. But as Ridge is as a business, we do not do custom projects. And I don't know, maybe that will change in the future as we adapt to, maybe changing needs in the wine country area of which we build. But for now, it fits us to only build for ourselves and take it to market. And
so, yeah, I'd love to talk about this because I've been building now for 21 years. And I would say early on, when I first started, I did a few specs because I sort of had to. But in the last, 16 years, I haven't done a single spec. I've only done customs. And I think there's a lot of builders that do a little bit of hybrid of both. And I think when someone does spec and they do really well, it looks really cool. But I've seen people sit on specs and lose a lot of money. Or I just talked to a builder today, actually, and he's got multiple specs, and the bank's calling his note, and he's like, "Holy smokes! I got to come up with $1 million in like 3 weeks. Like that is super stressful." And yes, you're trading. Going back to that earlier, now I didn't realize it was going to be so prophetic. Your heart is hard. Like one heart is the cash flow with the bank, and however you're funding this is like a real. You're predicting what you think the market will want, but without a homeowner, you're kind of designing. You're on a blank piece of paper. Maybe they like it, maybe they don't. And then if you do a custom, you're trading. You don't have the unknown of if you're going to get paid. Now you're trading the hard for navigating their emotions and their emotional roller coaster. Either one is sort of equally just difficult and different. It just depends on choose your hard. Yeah. I'm doing my first spec right now in 16 years. I'm really excited. I haven't been this energized personally about a spec home, a home probably since maybe early in my career. Like it has really re-energized me. Right. That being said, is like I'm still on past the design land. I'm into, I think windows go in a couple weeks, but in 8 months, if I'm sitting on this thing, it's not going to be very exciting anymore because the toll is dinging. How do you manage your expectations around the spec home that's going to be for sale, and how do you endure sitting on a home for a long period of time, and how do you navigate sort of that emotional roller coaster?
Yeah. No, I mean, great questions. And these are things that we spend a lot of time penciling out. When we get into any particular pre-development on anything, even before acquisition, we will run a number of scenarios tied to construction and development costs, to your point, holding costs as well. And we'll paint out scenarios that basically protect our ability to carry a project as long as we might foresee. We've been very lucky, as you talked at the very beginning of this conversation. I never have to explain or tell people, how beautiful Sonoma is. Sonoma sells itself. Everybody knows wine country. It's a brand. And to that point, when you build a home in Sonoma, you already know there's an audience. There's already a buyer who wants to come and live here. And so for us, it's about trying to build something that we think is really designed forward, doesn't alienate or exclude anyone from the perspective of wanting to open a door and picture themselves living there. We take chances on design elements and finishes and whatnot, but we never push it so far to a point where we feel like that might not land with someone. So there's a balance, I think, for sure, where we want to do something custom that meets the design and trend that we see in the market, but we do it in a way where we protect the downside, which is that if the market changes, we've got to make sure that we've got something that can check a lot of boxes of a number of buyers. When we landed here in 2018, to that point, projects we finished them and projects would sell. And so we were very lucky.
One question there is, do they typically sell during the build, or do they sell when they're done and furnished?
Yeah, so we've been really adamant also as a team to say we really don't want to pre-sell. We are focused on doing the absolute best project and finishing it out, and then pulling back the curtain. And we did it with real intention because we didn't want people to come in and, number one, miss an opportunity for a prospective buyer to not really get a sense of where we're headed. Vision is really important, and sometimes it's lost on individuals who aren't familiar with the construction process. They can walk through when things are covered and you're in a sheetrock phase and just not see where things are headed. So there's that. And then number two, we wanted to put our best foot forward and then let prospective buyers come and see it. So it's still our mandate. We really take everything through completion, and then with our real estate partners, come up with our marketing plan. And then that's really the first time it's seen. There are exceptions when, our prospective buyers might be from Europe and they're in town and we're a month out. And there are exceptions here and there where we'll make very selective decisions on when to kind of show something before it's done. But by and large, our process has always been, we finish a project, follow through with our marketing strategy, and then hope that it lands with buyers.
This episode is brought to you by Alpine Hardwood Flooring. They've been our partner now for over a decade, installing all our wood floors on all our new homes as well as our remodels. And on a personal level, Adam and Anthony Jinkala, the owners, are just absolutely amazing people. They've been so supportive of my career as well as doing anything we need to make sure that our clients are happy. And they work so well with our other vendors and trade partners at not only protecting their product, but also ensuring everyone else's looks great. So if you're looking for a wood floor or for a refinish, I highly recommend Alpine Hardwood Flooring. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, or even if this is your first episode, I talk about the Contractor Coalition Summit all of the time. Our next one is happening November 7th through November 10th in Chicago. And all the details can be found at thecontractorcoalitionsummit.com. You've got Brad Levitt, Nick Schiffer, Tyler Grace, Morgan Molitor, and myself will all be there. We've got great content over 3 days. You've got builders from all over the country. Try to get it to about that 30 people number. And we'll have sponsors as well that add a lot of value to each one of these dedicated days where you're talking about contracts and spreadsheets and margin and whether you're doing fixed bid or cost plus, your pre-construction agreements. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. If you haven't been following it yet, you should. The Contractor Coalition Summit
Instagram page is giving you a steady diet of the conversations that are being had, a lot of promo reels, a lot of the interviews that I've done personally at Omaha, which was my first contractor coalition where I'm part of the leadership. I interviewed all 36 people that attended, and we're going to be unveiling each one of their interviews over the next couple of months. So people that were not able to attend and would like to can kind of get a better idea of the value that builders are getting. So if you're going to sign up and come to Chicago, you can type in the promo code Curious Builder and get $2,500 off, and we'll see you in Chicago.
In terms of price range, what's the land costs in Sonoma? I'm sure there's a big range, but roughly what are the land costs and what kind of homes in terms of square footage and price range are you seeing in Sonoma for the homes that you're generating?
Yeah. So you talk about 7 years, and some people might say, wow, that's not a long time. And I would say that totally fair.
You would not, except that you went through the COVID time warp. So that
There's that as well.
you aged a decade. You got a decade of experience in 3 years.
Yeah. And so to that point also, I think the market has changed so much pre-COVID, during, and after. And when we first landed here, the metrics of what made smart sense in terms of land acquisition, construction, development, construction through the end are very, very different to where they are today. When I look back at what an acre of land was in 2018, I pull every penny out of my pocket in order to buy at that price point. Where we are today is, I go back to just what is Sonoma. It's an aspirational location, destination for people who have the means and the desire to come and make a beautiful vacation weekend home for themselves. That's really who our buyer is as well. We typically are not building for primary homeowners, and mostly just because of what we've gone after as a business. So we could go in and say, well, we're going to build for everybody. And we felt that we really needed to kind of, take a step back early on and focus on a specific buyer, kind of to pull something back from a past career. When we would do story development, you never pitch a movie and have somebody on the other end and it's looking to buy it and say, well, who's this movie for? You can't just say it's for everybody, right? You have to go after a very specific audience, because the more specific you are, the more specific you can be about making sure you're catering and crafting to that particular either audience member or homeowner. So we decided early on that we were going to build very beautiful, very high quality, very aspirational, no box unchecked, experiential living. And so what that means is that these are turnkey homes where, our last project and our one to be finished here in a couple of weeks, we partner with designers. We bring in furniture as we acquire furniture, as we're developing and constructing. And so the homes are sold fully furnished. The wine walls are completely stocked with and curated with wine. And they're meant to really be experienced on the day in which you purchase the home. You turn the key, you walk in.
Do you acknowledge, or do you end up listing it with a real estate agent? Do you keep it just sort of in-house, word of mouth connections? At what point do you start telling people, hey, we have a $3, $4, $5 million house coming up? How do you enter into this marketing phase of when you start, I think about a restaurant, kind of like grand opening. There's 2 restaurants in town here that were bought recently, and they've got coverings on the windows, and all you can see is like coming soon. Like, there's a lot of buzz about what is it? What's going to be? What kind of menu are they going to have? And then it's all of a sudden 1 week before grand opening, it's like, this is what it's going to be. How do you kind of do that showmanship? I mean, I'm kind of thinking about even like the movie industry. It's like a trailer. You've got your 3-4 trailers and just enough teaser to make people kind of show up for the intro of the movie. Walk me through kind of your sales process of what's working.
Yeah. So Sonoma is a very small market, and we also build within a micro sector of Sonoma. So we build in an area of town, which is typically the northeast quadrant, if you will. This is slightly more rural in terms of a land massing, but we are on a bicycle 5 minutes from the square. And so typically our buyers coming from the city on a Friday afternoon or evening, they want to park their car and with their family, enjoy the home first and foremost, but also be quick to the square for restaurants and shopping and what. And so my point is that there's not a lot of competition. So anytime somebody breaks ground on new construction in this town, everybody's aware of it. And that goes to all the other competitive developers, but also the real estate agents as well.
Is that because permitting is so difficult, or land is so difficult to acquire, or both?
So both, from a land acquisition perspective, there's few and far between, and we're very selective. We will kick tires on a number of opportunities before we land on what we think is absolutely the path forward. The cost is prohibitive, so it narrows, I think, the possibilities from a competitive landscape.
Are they mostly teardowns?
It's a mix. It's a mix. When we first started, we would go after land that was either raw or, to your point, also had a structure on it that we would more than likely demolish and build new. It's no mystery. The permitting development process in California, by and large, is incredibly challenging.
Like how long, every time I hear it, because I've had several, I had Dig and Koffler on from San Diego, and it was like multiple years. And I'm like, I get bent out of shape if my permit takes more than 45 days in Minnesota. And I'm like, I don't know if I could do it. I think I would have to choose a different career. I'd be like, what is taking so long? So like, how long does it take?
So it's dependent on, obviously, the project at hand. For a new single family residence on raw land from start to finish, and let's exclude the architecture piece of it.
Right, agreed. Yeah, that's totally different.
As long as you want. But, plans are done, they're submitted to the county. I say minimally you're looking at 9 to 12 months. And that's jumping through a number of different departments, from planning, engineering, fire, well and septic, et cetera. It takes a long time. We've become accustomed to it. I'm not saying it's any less frustrating, but I do now understand, the process in why it does take as long as it does. And that's single family. That's on a single parcel. Our last development we've done we acquired 6 acres and subdivided it. And that took 3.5 years. And with a number of additional conditions of approval where we had to take through the continued development. So anytime we broke ground, we had to have an archaeologist on site. Anytime we took a tree down, if it was within a bird and bat breeding time of the year, we'd have to have a biologist out to do a study on that. So there's just a lot of little,
oh my word,
challenges in terms of.
You are a saint. I couldn't do it. I'd have to leave the state. I couldn't do it. Oh man, this is just listening to you is giving me anxiety. How, just incredible. How are you? So, I mean, from an operational standpoint, or a cash flow standpoint, I think you said you've done 8 projects in 8 years. So you're getting one a year roughly. How do you manage sort of the cash flow? Because you're doing a spec home, which I assume takes a lot of cash, whether you're doing using bank financing or private financing or partners or however you're doing it. And we can talk about that if you want. And then you take, let's say, what an average build for you is for construction, a year and a half? How long do these homes take?
Yeah, anywhere from 12 to, 14, 16 months. Yeah.
So you're really talking about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years if you factor in architecture time, maybe more per cycle. So the questions are stumbling into each other, but I guess where I'm trying to go is, how do you manage if you're not getting a payday till 3 years later? How do you manage those 3 years? Because you're not taking on other remodels, you're not taking on other customs. It seems very problematic. How do you manage cash flow?
Yeah. So we have a great team, and that's the benefit of great partners. So within the organization, my father has passed away a couple years ago. So, that's in and of itself something we could talk about, how we as a business and as a family have managed and gone through that. But when I talk about just the management of the challenges of doing development, as you asked, my sister Allegra is incredible. She's tenacious and she's very detailed and very organized. And so she's very good about, pushing and making sure our project is constantly flowing through the county, not wasting any time sitting on somebody's desk. So that helps tremendously. Sina, among many things, also is she manages all of our money and our cash flow, and she's very, very good at that. So we've got experts in their own particular lanes and managing lane, as I said, workflow that all helps the bigger picture. And we hold hands very well on it. When you talk specifically about the cash flow piece of it, we will typically self-fund land acquisition, architecture, design. We have a mix of partners that we'll bring to the table for construction financing. Depending on the scale, we'll also either self-fund or we will bring other partners on board. As you know, it ramps up. So on day one, shovel to dirt, you're out $100. But then as you quickly start to, go vertical, you start to spend $100 a second. And so Sina's very good at managing that and making sure we only are leveraging the capital that we absolutely needed that particular moment to kind of allow us to curate as
And
well.
I guess the benefit, you're not publishing the price till the end. So you're factoring in your interest costs, which you should. You're factoring in real estate commissions, whatever there may be, into the end. So like you have a very known entity. That's one of the advantages of the way you're doing it, where a lot of people that do spec home builders say the price up front because they know that the earlier they can sell it, the more profitable it'll be, the less their cash burden may be. However, in doing so, you're sort of taking a pinpoint in time of what you think the cost is. Because I mean, you know this, if I sell a house halfway through, just pick a number, doesn't matter. Let's just say you've got, I don't know, let's say you're just spending 5,000 on interest a month or 10,000, doesn't matter for this analogy. So halfway through, let's just say you have 100 grand in interest and you pick that price point. It's pretty hard 6 months after that, if you don't sell it, to then adjust the price up another 100,000. So the way you're doing it sort of makes sense because you know what your cost is. If you're not listing it to, because will you, like this home that's going to be available in a couple of weeks, is it listed now or will you wait till the day it unveils to sort of list it on the market?
Well, in terms of landing on a price, it goes back to before we even acquire. We pencil out scenarios ad nauseum. We'll come up with a blue sky scenario where everything's aligned. The market has continued to grow in support of Sonoma. We just built something better than we ever could have imagined. This is the number. And then we will paint a worst case scenario just as a downside, as a way to hedge kind of any sort of number of obstacles or challenges that might, present themselves. And so it's a mix of all of that. And I think from a pricing perspective, I think we typically know where we're headed. Sometimes during a construction of a couple of our projects, the market post-COVID just appreciated, real estate in Sonoma appreciated so drastically that it allowed us to kind of push our number a little bit. But by and large, where we start our project, typically we know where we're going to list it at. And that's just simply an analysis of, what have we spent to acquire and build and where do we think the value is? I think the one thing that we do that's sometimes hard is, when you're in a market where there's a lot of inventory close by each other, it's a spreadsheet analysis to some degree. It's a commodity business. You can kind of look at the metrics on price per square footage, land size, and then you get into things that are a little bit more subjective, amenities, and then quality of construction, et cetera. For us, we are all in on building ultra high quality homes. And so that's a little bit harder, to look at on a spreadsheet in terms of understanding, well, what am I buying and what did it cost them to build this? And am I overpaying or whatever? We're building absolute experiences. And so we feel like when someone comes and sees our home, the cost per square footage is almost like not even important. It's more about immediately they envision themselves creating memories with their family, throwing big events. And so that for us is, I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off of having to make sure it's a formula of math that makes sense.
I love that. I mean, right now we're doing this project that I talk a lot about called Misa Hus, which we've created an entire brand around a philosophy, because to your point a little bit, you have the benefit of a vacation market where the city is your draw. In Minnesota, no one is vacationing here in the winter unless you're a hockey player, I guess. But anyway, it's actually not that cold. It's not cold enough anymore. You can't even skate on the lakes. It's pathetic. Anyway, long story short, you have to kind of play to your strengths. Like, what is kind of the goal? I'm sort of envious sometimes of vacation destinations, whether it's like Bozeman, Montana, or Aspen, or Scottsdale, Arizona, or wherever it might be, where you can get you can get locals if you want, but you also have a lot of people from around the country coming in. Because to your point, if it's a second or third home, obviously if you're lucky enough or fortunate enough to sort of be able to afford that, price per square foot is not the thing that's really driving the conversation. Right now I'm a design on a custom. And I am in the spin cycle on cost per square foot. And it's like every builder's worst discussion, because, it's like, the only thing that you should really buy by the pound is like your steak, like your filet mignon. I get why they do that, or salmon. But like, man, buying a house on per foot is and unfortunately our industry doesn't give clients a very good alternative. That's on us as messaging, to your point about experience. And I agree that from a sales and marketing standpoint, and I've become sort of fascinated with branding and storytelling, which obviously was your first 20-year career. And so I'd love to hear from you. How have you used sort of filmmaking and kind of the art of a story in construction? That's very interesting to me, because I think you have a very unique, not only skill set, but point of view. How has that been helpful in building homes?
Yeah. So to your point, and this is where I do feel like my past experience really lends to, allowing me to add value to the business is, what I do on a day in, day out basis is I protect the creative integrity and the vision of what Allegra and Sina have really designed, through the architecture and all of the finishes, details. They really own that part of the business. And then I kind of interface between protecting that and also then getting the work done. So we have a tremendous, group of subcontractor partners that we work with on a consistent basis. We feel so lucky. It's a small town, and we feel like we pinch ourselves all the time. We work with tremendous craftsmen, people who care deeply about what they do, and our opportunity to them is really just let us give you this space to kind of do the task that you enjoy, but also at the end of the day, hopefully we can all stand back and look at it and be proud of the work that we've created. And so to that point, it is storytelling. It's about creating an idea, the start of a journey. And through that process, there's a lot of hard work, a lot of ups and downs. But if you persevere through it, you can stand back and look at something that you're really, really proud of. And that's a story I could tell all day long. I love bringing people during construction or after construction through our homes and pointing out little details. Even the smallest of detail I could talk about for hours. So I think as it ties back to the products that we build and ultimately put out on the market, we do stuff that's not easy and it's really complicated. And we try to do it as best as we can and execute at such a high level that when somebody does walk into the home, we hope that they look and see all of the hard work and almost want to understand, how is this piece together? So that in and of itself is a story in terms of how we create a journey and ultimately deliver something. And there's a lot of things. I'm not saying that every little detail is ever picked up on by a homeowner or someone who buys our projects, but I think there's enough of it there to create originality and uniqueness that sets what we build apart from others. There are also, I will just say this, there are a number of other incredible home builders in Sonoma. We are not unique in that aspect. We're just trying to kind of make a brand that we think stands for beautiful design and architecture and really high quality execution. So.
How in your title you've got design and build, but then you mentioned that you basically partner with local designers and architects. Are you doing some design in-house, or are you assembling the team outside of Ridge in terms of architect and interior designer to deliver this as a sort of unified package, and also leveraging their brands and expertises in also selling it?
Yeah. So my father was a builder, but also architect. He was self-taught.
Oh, wow.
I remember as a kid, vellum paper all over the place, or erasing shavings all over the office floor. And then he self-taught himself a new piece of software called AutoCAD 100 years ago. And so when we started the business in 2018, my father was our architect. And you can imagine having someone in-house as talented as he was, what a value add, but what a strong component of the business. And there were times where, a lot of times I think the idea of where we were headed started between my father and Allegra and Sina. I mean, they really were the kind of creative minds behind the type of architecture and projects we wanted to build. But then as my dad would start to kind of allow that to take shape, Allegra and Sina were very much into the layout of the building, the floor plans. And having my father on board meant that we could have a 5 p.m. meeting where Allegra and Sina would hand a list of notes to and say, let's move this door here, or let's take this roof line and change the shape. And, this doesn't exist in the real world, but we would show up, or wake up the next morning, and by, 6 or 7, o'clock in the morning, all of the revisions were done. They were completed. My father would have woken up at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning to get that work done. And, we miss him on so many different levels, but that ability to just move at that speed is something that just does not exist in the real world. So now, yes, to that point, since his passing, we've had to kind of find someone or a mix of people to fill that role. And there's a lot of incredible architects, and we've partnered with a few of them to build that piece of the business. But yeah, it's a mix of, I think having a strong vision and working with really talented people who your job is to, of course, make sure that you're all seeing the same vision on the same page. And, ultimately, I think our objective is to give runway to talented individuals to do the best work that they can do, and making sure it's just aligned with the overall brand or project's vision.
This episode is brought to you by Adaptive. If you're still chasing checks and juggling spreadsheets, it's time to upgrade. Adaptive is revolutionizing how builders get paid with AI-powered bill pay, automated draws, one-click payments, and built-in lien waivers. Faster payments, fewer headaches, and total visibility. Adaptive takes care of the back-end chaos so you can focus on what you do best, building. We've used Adaptive for 2.5 years and trust them to keep our projects moving and payments flowing. Learn more at adaptive.build and simplify the pay process today. For more information, you can also listen to episode 10 and episode 15. This episode is brought to you by Pella Windows and Doors. I've used Pella for 21 years as the exclusive window company on every one of my builds. When people ask me who I trust for windows and doors, it's Pella, every time. Their craftsmanship, their innovation, the top-tier service make them a no-brainer for any custom home builder or designer who demand the best. Whether you're designing something bold or building something with timeless elegance, Pella has you covered. They're also the only window company that has a lifetime warranty on all of their windows. I've gotten to know all of their people at Pella Corporate, as well as locally here at Pella Northland. I'm proud to call them our partners and our friends. Visit Pella.com to learn more and connect with your local reps today. Also, for more information, you can listen to episode 1, where I interview their founders, as well as episode 109, where we talk about the innovation at Pella.
When you talk about like the touches of design and details on the interiors, when we made a strategic and business decision to actually furnish our homes and have them be truly turnkey, we had a couple of people in mind, and it was the same thing where we wanted them to understand and align with the vision, but then we just kind of let them run with it, and they've done an exceptional job.
I think that's very well said. I mean, also ultimately master delegating. I think sometimes, when we hold something too tightly, and, I've often said, like, Pavarotti as a singer is one of the world's best singers. I don't actually know if he's still alive or not, but then like you get 100 people in a choir, you can't even hear Pavarotti. And so, a true scale or true artistry, both are artists in their own right. But I love what you said, or how you said it, is giving people the runway, the artist the runway to really, kind of set sail and show the whole breadth of their talent. I have a designer right now who I think is very talented, and for whatever reason, I've always hated wood surrounds around tubs. I just hate them, mainly because I know from a maintenance standpoint that eventually some little kid or someone's going to splash, that water's going to go over the edge, it's going to go down the wood, and within a few years, that wood's going to split, it's going to crack, blah, 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 blah. Wood and water don't go together, and I'm going to get a call as the builder because I've got to warranty this. Anyway, so on this beautiful spec home we're doing, lo and behold, I find out she's designed this wood panel around this beautiful tub. And it was like cringe moment because I'm so anti-wood surrounds. This happened yesterday, actually. But I told the designer when she came on, I said, you get 5 votes to my 1 in every decision. Because I said, if it's left to the architect and I, it's going to get too Scandinavian modern. And my clientele is mostly women, like most, they rule the roost. I had one designer that said, happy wife, happy life. And so we know who's making decisions. And so I told, shout out to the OHO design team. I said, you have 5 to 1. So anyway, she looks at me and she goes, I know you don't like wood. She goes, don't make me do it. And I knew exactly, she was going to use her 5 to 1 ratio. And I said, I don't need to, because I know you're going to win anyway. I said, I feel like this is turning into a marriage where it's like, I'm not even letting you use your power. I've already acknowledged that you're going to win anyway. So I'm just going to go along with it from the get-go. But anyway, long story short, I believe in her. I believe in what she does. And I believe in her clientele that loves what she does, which is really what we're tapping into with the interior design on that home. And so I know it's going to be, I don't want to let my bias get in the way of a beautiful end product. And if I really felt that, it was going to be a damaged product or something like that, then obviously I would have to step in. But it is sort of funny that we all carry certain biases, good and bad. And, sometimes in order to let the artist go, you sort of have to step back and kind of, let go of your bias.
I will say though, as a business, we're really lucky because while Sina and Allegra really do own the creative and the vision and the design of it, they are just as knowledgeable of the construction component. And so when they do design something that might have, future challenges in terms of usability, they're aware of it. And sometimes we'll make the decision to actually switch a material or way pieces are put together, or other times we'll just follow through with it. And so it's helpful if a designer understands how things are put
Oh, for
together
sure.
in the future. And what I say to everybody is a house is a living and breathing being, and it requires constant maintenance from the day it's completed. So things like what you just say, things need management from a usability
Well, and
perspective.
I think one of the biggest things, in particular, I don't know, we might be similar age. I'm 44. I think one of the biggest things that we have in our demographic and younger is really, especially in high-end homes, is teaching and letting the client understand that these things need care and maintenance to maintain. I can't think of anything, high-end airplane, a car, whatever it is, it
Oh,
needs
yeah.
maintenance. And why would we think that a multi-million-dollar house is any different? And yet there's this broad expectations. In particular, I'm picking on the younger generation for, maybe because they don't have the life experience or the wisdom or just having gone through it, to understand that this idea of perfection is one that I really try to combat right away because it's so toxic. I do like your comment about experience, and I think we as an industry would do a better job if we talked about the experience, or another word for that is lifestyle. What lifestyle do you want to live? And I think also having some humility, with our home, like this isn't perfect. Like this is a prototype. It's a one-off. It's never been done before, nor will it ever be completely repeated with the exact same team, the exact same. It's one of one. And so these expectations that people have, in your case, they don't get to see how the sausage is made. They just get to show up at the deli and be like, "Hey, here it is. Do you like it or not?" Now, once they move into it, I'm sure, like any business owner, you've had clients call and say, "Hey, this was my expectations," and you work through it, and it's fine. But
Mhm.
I do think the messaging that we as a community need to have is that, I like it. This is a living, breathing thing, and it's changing. You wouldn't a terrible example, but it's one that comes to mind. It's like you wouldn't just have a child and be like, "I'm done." The child's born. Like I don't have to raise it. Like it just does its own thing. Like obviously, I have 3 little kids, so like obviously I'm trying to think of the most absurd thing as possible. Like my kids could raise themselves. It's constantly. Parents' job is never done.
Yeah.
And I think a home is sort of like that too. We have sort of a contract with the home sort of indefinitely. And it's not a bad thing. I think it can be if we let it be sort of toxic. But I think if we realize that when people truly care about their homes and they're willing to invest in maintaining it and keeping it, because we all appreciate a home that's been, I love travel. You go to Europe and you see these homes that are hundreds of years old, and
Yes.
the way they put patina, and
Yes.
our country is just so young. We're only a couple hundred years old. We don't have anything we don't even have anything here like that except some trees.
Yeah.
And it's like, except we cut them all down already. So, but anyway, I'll get off my soapbox and let you respond to some of those things.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, again, back to what we do within design, we want to do things that are fresh and original, but we also want to make sure that they have, a lifetime ahead of them, and that someone's not buying the house and wanting to tear everything out in 5 years. So we definitely try to find things, materials, colors, finishes that are going to last. And maybe to your point with hard surfaces, sometimes they actually look better over age. So we're mindful of that for sure. And then just to your point though about usability, for sure, it is. I think the house looks its best when the day it's bought, and it does need to be maintained. But that a lot of times allows for a homeowner to understand how things actually get used or how things were built, and bring up the example of on this particular build, we put 14-foot tall Fleetwood sliding doors. And I mean, Fleetwood is one of the best brands in that space, and they're 14 feet tall. And so I think over time, they're going to need some adjustments as someone who comes in, maybe, an adult might want to open them softly. No doubt if there are kids that live in this home, they're going to be slamming them open. And so I think just it goes to the point of a house gets used and experienced on different levels. And to that point needs to be, maintained as such.
How, you mentioned to it earlier, with the passing of your dad, how have you handled that transition? And was it something that you saw kind of coming? Was it more abrupt? And how has that affected the business? And the reason I ask it, other than to get your story a little bit about it and talk about it, is so many construction companies in the United States are family owned. And we're actually going to be doing a series. I haven't had time to dive into it, but I'll just set it with this. If I was to die suddenly, a client asked me the other day, like, if I died suddenly, would my company continue building his home? And so it set off a series of questions. I did a few podcast episodes about what we would do or what I would want to have done. And so we're actually in the process of creating sort of like stepping stones. I know it's a morbid topic, but like, it happens. That's life. It's a habit. And I'm just curious how you've sort of navigated, that difficult time, because I think it'd be very helpful for other family-owned businesses to sort of understand what to prepare for, how to prepare for it. And because it's not an easy thing, no matter how it goes, no matter how prepared you are, I imagine it's one of the most difficult things you've ever done in your life.
Yeah, it was when I think back, 9 years ago, and this idea of us moving and starting this business with my father, and I look back on it now, and it was just so weird how I think it all came to be. It was almost like, in a way, not that he knew, but in a way, it was like I think maybe he identified this kind of this desire to want to teach his kids everything that he had learned in his lifetime, in the event, God forbid, that he does pass away. And so I look back in those 7 years before his passing, or 6, I'm sorry, I feel so lucky that we were in his space and learning and absorbing as much as we could. I know it brought him great joy, but now I know it gives us now an ability to carry his legacy. And that's really how we look at it. He had cancer. He didn't tell, the family knew, but he was a proud man, very private. He never wanted people to talk about him. He only wanted to talk about other people. And that was just kind of the type of person that he was. Anyone who met him loved him immediately. And my father, would be the first person to go up to a stranger and introduce himself and ask who they are and what do they do and what makes them happy. And so while he was sick for a couple of years, it was very abrupt to some degree, because no one really in the community, and certainly people that we did business with, really knew about it. And so it was very hard to go through it for a couple of years, to see him sick, to fight as hard as he did. But then it was also then, really challenging as people then, when he did pass away, find out about it. And we had to kind of navigate through not that it was a challenge, but it just was, it was an interesting time for sure. And we, as a business, as a family, really, first and foremost, we are a family. I feel so lucky to work with my sister and my wife on a day-to-day basis. It's not without challenges. I'm sure they would say it's more challenging to work with me than me to them. But at the end of the day, when you love people, you find, solutions in through any particular challenge or obstacle. And so we love what we do, and we try really hard because of my father. And so with his passing, I think we've doubled up, our effort. We've rolled up our sleeves ever tighter and carry forth a legacy that I know he would be very proud of. And we hear and feel him over our shoulders all the time. When we're looking at a dilemma, I know what he would say. I pretend like I would battle him a little bit on whether we should turn left or right, but ultimately, most of the time, as he was right. We mourned, and we still do every day, but we do our best to kind of keep moving forward and making him, really proud of.
I mean, one thing that's very obvious, especially if somebody watches this, although I think you can hear it in your voice, like from the moment you started talking, I feel like there's a lot of joy in you. I feel like it's sort of exploding. It reminds me actually of the character, and just because I have young kids, it reminds me of the character and Inside Out. You've got this joy, you kind of have this glow about you. And, obviously I haven't met your sibling or your wife, but I do think that our personalities show up in our homes. I don't think how they can't. I think any business
100%.
owner, especially when you're a small business, I do think that the reason leadership matters so much, and why so many companies end up taking on a lion's share of the owner's personality, for good or for bad. It's not always good, but that it depends on the industry, of course. But home building, like, man, if you can weaponize joy, it's a good thing, right? I mean, we fill a home, and we are building a home for people. And you talk about experiences, like, who doesn't want a joyful experience? And, anyway, I can see it in your countenance. And so it actually reminds me that I told my wife years ago, because the French Laundry, is it still, I assume it's still operational.
Yeah.
I told her at one of these anniversaries we'd have to go out there. So if and when I fulfill my promise, I shouldn't say if, when I fulfill my promise, assuming she wants to go, we will definitely have to stop by and see one of your homes in person, because I do want to see them. I do have a great admiration for some of the California architecture. It does feel very, it feels great. And so your permitting process, man, just kills me.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no way around that. But
I know.
we would love to see you, and I'd love to show you. And you're right about the we love what we do, and that came from my father for sure. My father used to say, "Love what you do, live with those you love, and learn to relax." And I think he was very good at the first two. He always, was challenged with the relaxing part, and I think we embody that as well. We are passionate about the work that we do. We're passionate about the people that we work with. And that is our mindset. And to your point, we really do hope it shows in the quality and the level in which we execute our
I
business.
think you've benefited greatly from having such a strong why. I think this is one thing I've always admired about business owners, especially in construction, just because that's where most of my interviews are. But people that have had a career before they start construction they just have a clear why, because you left a career for something specific. And I feel like when you really know your purpose, and I think there's something with age, I feel just like over the last couple of years, I've really gotten a lot clearer on my personal why for both businesses, The Curious Builder and Mark Williams Custom Homes. But I think sometimes it takes time, but I'm always envious is not maybe the right word. I'm always encouraged when I see people that have a very clear why, because they're, it's like an arrow. If your arrow's all crooked, who knows what target's going to hit? You're going to shoot an arrow, but where's it going to go? But when your arrow is so true and so straight, like I love how clear you are. We build spec homes, we build experience homes. We are not building for clients. We are going to build this beautiful thing, and we will attract. One of my favorite quotes is, your vibe attracts your tribe. Your vibe of your homes is attracting, the tribe that lives in it. In this analogy, and just. I love that for you. I have so many questions that we'll have to do another podcast I'm just very curious about the how and the process as you go through it. Maybe as one parting question here as we close in at the end is, you've set the budget early on. How do you handle, like any spec home builder, because I'm dealing with this right now, is you've set the budget and you're getting into it and you see this really cool thing. And you're like, I love it. And you personally feel passion towards it. And the home does reflect the passion of you and your family as you build it. How do you put guardrails on your passions and what should go in the house versus what may make it all of a sudden now, unreasonable? It's too expensive. Usually my taste ends up being, it steers it to be too expensive. How do you navigate that?
We build in fat contingencies. Simply said, we build in a big line item early on, knowing that we're going to discover opportunities as we go through it. Ultimately, though, we don't have an endless amount of money. So, the best opportunities, we always make sure we capture. Things where we feel like this could go either way, it'd be great to have, but also is it going to make or break, a vision for a room or a detail, whatever it may be. The value of having three individuals, within the management process is great because you've got, the ability to vote. And we typically always, if we don't 100% align, we definitely get to a point where we can respect one person's decision on why it doesn't make sense or why they're passionate about making it happen. And we will come around and share that person's vision. But we try our best to hit our number. We go in saying this is going to cost $100, and we try our best to get to the $100 at the end with plus or minus our contingency. And most of the time we get there. Sometimes you've got to just go after it and say, this additional spend, we're going to get it because we can raise the price. Right. It's an amenity or it's a detail that we know we're going to get credit for. We just didn't see it on day one, but now we see it. We have got to follow it through. So there's a lot of adjustments.
I like that the contingency. I'm working with a client right now and their budget is extremely tight. And we're a cost plus builder. So I'm like, the cost is the cost. If you want to change the price, I can give you options on what you can cut, but there's no magic formula here. You have to be willing for the cut. And it's always a hard discussion because of expectations. And of course, everyone tends to look, even us as builders, we mentioned it early on in the podcast. If you go back and buy land in 2018 and 19, you'd empty every cent you have to buy it because that's just how it goes. And I guess my question is, a contingency. Someone gave me good advice, and it's one that I now use a lot with clients, but I probably should have done a better job of using it for myself on the spec home, which is we need a contingency. We either need to factor in a contingency in the contract, because if you're doing it with the bank, where the cost overrun is going to come from, we can build it right into the contract. Banks are totally fine with that.
Yeah.
Or you have to carry a contingency privately and know that when you come to that crossroads, that's your contingency. Or we have to carry the contingency somehow or another. And I think that is something that I need to do a better job of. I do talk about it with our clients, because I think the most successful builds are the ones where inevitably, and I guess you haven't had this because you're not having clients to deal with, but man, it does sound kind of nice when you talk about it. Is they inevitably price out the house, and I guess we do this all the time for spec homes too, because we're doing, of course, price evaluation. Hey, it comes back at this, we bring it back. Inevitably, it almost always gets added back to the project, and really on two paths. Either it gets added back before we start, and those projects go much smoother, or the client wants the lower win in the beginning, but then throughout the entire build, they keep adding it back in, but it's much more begrudging. And usually I don't have let's just call it costs $2 more, or it costs double as it goes back in during the build, because now it's slowing things down. The team is circling, trying to get it back in. Plus there's the factor of enjoyment. The client is really fatigued because they keep adding. What they never remember, I've never had a single client ever remember this in 21 years, is it was them that cut the budget, but it's now my fault for adding it, when it's really their choice to add it. And it's really that's where, man, tact is the art of making a point without making an enemy. And I don't always get that right, because we really have to be on our game and how we present that information. Because the last thing we want to do is tell the client, like, hey, this is your fault. Like, that's obviously not very tactful, but yet at the same time, it is their fault. And so how do you sort of, put this in kind of a compliment sandwich and be like, hey, we're going to add this. This is a great choice. But, really you made the choice 6 months ago when you signed the contract to sort of have to go through this. It's just, it's one that we always have to combat. And I mean, do you feel like any of that resonates, even though it's all internal for you? Have you ever felt like you've cut stuff and then you add it back and you're like, man, we should just had it from beginning?
For sure. I mean, and it can come from things that we think are going to make the project better or improve the end experience. It can also come from, we thought steel was going to cost one thing on day one, and 9 months later, it's 50% more. So it can come from material costs that are all of a sudden ballooning to us adding things as well. And yeah, I mean, we've got nobody to answer to but ourselves. So that has its own challenges, and we make mistakes every single day. I mean, I love doing what we're doing as spec builders, but it is also very challenging. It has its own unique, obstacles, and we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, well, we did just decide on this on day one, and if we're going to ebb and flow along the journey, we've got to hold ourselves accountable for the decision we're making, but also the ramifications. At the end of the day, margins might get tighter, even where we think our best end use is we can get more for the money, more money for the house. So yes, it's a daily journey where we are constantly making adjustments that ultimately we really believe are better for the project, but do have consequences that we've got to manage along our workflow.
Well, when this home comes on the market, ping me on Instagram, and we'll post it in stories and take it to this episode, because I'd love to see the final reveal when it goes up on the website and you do all the photos. So
that'd be great. Yeah, we have one house. We have one house on the market right now, which is the VentanaSonoma.com. Okay, that's the house that's on the market, and then we have another one that's coming on in just about 3 or 4 weeks. This is part of that 6-acre subdivision that we've built. Okay. I'd love to send you links to them, and would love to have you out here and show you in person. I know you and I would have a great time. Looking at all the details and how the sausage is made.
Yeah, I love it.
Appreciate it. Yeah,
I love it. Well, I appreciate your time coming on, and for all the listeners, we'll have everything in the show notes. And thanks again.
Thank you, Mark. Really nice time.
We've had the podcast now for 2.5, almost 3 years now, and we have a consulting page, one-to-one consulting. You can book my time for 1 hour. Perhaps you've heard a guest where you like one of the topics. Maybe you want an introduction to some of the guests that I've had on. Perhaps you want to talk about branding or marketing or anything that we've covered on the podcast over the last 2.5 years. You can book a time at curiousbuilderpodcast.com. Thanks for tuning in to the Curious Builder Podcast. If you like this episode, do us a favor, share it with 3 other business owners. The best way that we can spread what we're doing is by word of mouth, and with your help, we can continue to help other curious builders expand their business. Please share it with your friends, like and review online, and thanks again for tuning in.